Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you this evening. Jim Holway, candidate for Arizona Corporation, and we're doing another in our series of live internet town halls. So, a couple logistics so you understand how it's working here. There's about a 1.5 to 2 minute delay between my talking and then you seeing it. And in fact, you may wind up seeing some of that on the back screen behind me, which will be tracking with what you're seeing. But the way to get a question to us is you come in through YouTube. You'll notice within that YouTube that there's a chat function. If you submit a question versus chat, it will come in and we will see that and we'll track that. And it may take a few minutes because of the delay, but we'll try to answer your question. We plan to go for about a half an hour, though if we got a lot of questions coming, we could stretch that a bit, but that's the initial plan here, to go for half an hour. And also you'll see that some questions will be submitted by our staff and volunteers who are helping out. We're getting some questions by Facebook or coming in other ways, and then you'll see those getting posted as well. So again, Jim Holway, running for the Arizona Corporation Commission, and we've decided to start reaching out directly to all of you, the voters, and this is a mechanism to do that. We've been doing about one of these a day, and actually I'll say more about this at the end, but we're going to do a whole series tomorrow. So tomorrow we're going to start at 10 a.m. and at every hour, at the top of the hour, we will broadcast for about 10 minutes. And we'll have a series of guests that are coming in as well. So join us tomorrow, anywhere from 10 o'clock to 4 o'clock for those 10 minutes. And again, submit questions via Facebook, or you can go into YouTube right now, and there is a posting for each of those events. You can actually go in and even submit questions in the chat function now, and they will be there as we get started. So please join us tomorrow as we continue this effort. We're doing this because our perspective is campaigns should be about talking about issues. Campaigns should be about connecting with the voters. I don't believe that's happening enough in this campaign. You're seeing negative commercials, you're seeing pre-canned messages, but you're not getting to see candidates like you should. In my campaign for the Corporation Commission, we did have our clean elections debate, but we were supposed to have 4 other debates. And then there was another 4 recently. My opponents have shown up for none of them. So by and large, they've gotten canceled. And again, this is our way to reach out to you, because I think that's how this is supposed to be working. So appreciate any feedback you have for us, and we're looking forward to the conversation. So let me say a bit more about the commission and myself, and then we'll dive into questions that you have for us. So the Corporation Commission, I think you'd understand it better if we called it the Arizona Public Utilities Commission. It's pretty much every state has one of these. We are in charge of regulating the rates and setting the policy for private utilities. That's electricity, water and sewer, natural gas, telephone, landlines, not cell phones, but landlines. And that's certainly what the commission is most known for. The commission also does have responsibilities for railroad and pipeline safety, for financial securities regulation, and if you have a corporation in Arizona, or if you're a nonprofit that want to incorporate, the commission is where you file your paperwork, it's where you file your annual reports. And so there's where the name of the Corporation Commission comes, but that's actually a fairly small part of their responsibility. Some of the key controversies that are before the commission recently that you may be hearing about. One of the biggest ones has been the question of solar. To what degree are we going to make investments in Arizona in solar, and how far are we going to go with those, and what is the cost going to be, and who's going to pay it? That's been one big issue. Another big issue is to what degree are we going to open up our electric industry to greater competition? And in other words, do you just get your power from Arizona Public Service or SRP or Tucson Electric Power or your local co-op? Or in fact, can you go out on the open market and get your power from any number of firms, and then your local utility would have to wheel it to you? There are some states that have headed down this path. Arizona has not. That's another area that will be a significant controversy. It is today and will be for the next commission. Much of the commission's time is regularly spent with water issues. There are over 400 water and sewer companies, some good size, some very small, that serve residents throughout Arizona. And then obviously multiple issues with our water supplies in terms of making sure we continue to have secure supplies. One of the most recent controversies is one that's been brought up by the election itself, and that's the presence of what's called dark money or secret funding coming into the campaign. So far in this campaign, We've had about $500,000 come in from the solar industry in the Republican primary to unsuccessfully try to get two pro-solar Republicans to the Republican primary. At this point, we have $3 million coming in what is truly called dark money. We don't know the source, although speculation is rampant and everyone assumes it's primarily coming from Arizona Public Service. There is no confirmation of that. But this has become a big issue in the campaign, and I'll talk more about that later on in this half hour. So there's a kind of a quick overview, just to introduce myself briefly. I have 35 years of experience working on land and water and growth and energy issues. I've been in Arizona for 23 years, spent much of that time as the assistant director for the Arizona Department of Water Resources, and then was at Arizona State University for a number of years, and then worked with a nonprofit group that worked throughout the West on water and land issues. 4 years ago, I was privileged to be elected by Maricopa County residents to represent them on the Central Arizona Project Board. That's the canal that brings our water from the Colorado River into Central Arizona, and has been doing that for 4 years now. That's a volunteer, nonpartisan position, but given me a chance to continue to be active on some of the key water issues in our state. So I have a broad range of experience. In fact, the Arizona Republic in their endorsement of me acknowledged that I am one of the most qualified candidates to ever have sought this office. I fully appreciate that endorsement. And what I'm looking for now is I'm looking for your endorsement. As you realize, we're down to the last week of the campaign. Probably about half of you have voted already. And I'm looking to, one, connect with you, but also to reach out to those of you who haven't voted. So let's turn our attention to some of the questions we've gotten and some of the issues that are out there. And we have a couple of questions. I'm looking behind to see the questions that are posted here. So we have one question asking what is the biggest difference between myself and my opponents? And another question is, how will my decision-making process be different than theirs? So that's a good general question. Let's start there, and then we'll move on to some more specific ones. I think there are a couple of differences between me and my opponents. One is the level of experience I have. That's the reason I was identified as one of the most qualified candidates. I come as someone who has expertise in water management in the state. I ran our state water management programs. I started my career briefly for a year working in the East Coast, working on utility economics and utility conservation. I have a PhD in land use and water resources planning, and my dissertation work was looking at the economic impact of environmental regulations. So, much of what comes before the commission are essentially economic issues. I will be one of the few commissioners who will not have to rely on staff to decipher some of the technical economic analysis done. I have experience in that field. So from experience, I clearly bring the most experience to the plate and to the commission. I think second, I point to the different approach I've taken, and I invite you to look more into my campaign, and I think you'll see some pretty clear differences between the kind of campaign we've run, where we are out there actively in social media. We've been traveling the state. If you work with social media, go to my Facebook page, Holway for Arizona, and what you will see is a robust debate going on as we reach out across the political spectrum to folks of a diversity of views. And what's ensued is a debate, at times an argument. There are times where I weigh in with perspectives and opinions, and other times where I am really just trying to weigh in and moderate conversation on some of these issues across the state. So it goes back to the approach as well we're trying here with the YouTube video that you were watching. Just another technique to reach out throughout Arizona. For me, in terms of my decisions to run, a key one was the passion I have for these issues, the contribution I believe I can make to our state with what I have done in my career. But perhaps more importantly than that, for me personally, as many of you that I've heard about throughout the state, I'm very pained at the degree of political divisiveness that has entered into our politics. It's really become a matter not of respecting individual opinions, but a matter of thinking, I'm right, you're wrong, I'm good, you're bad. It makes it impossible to find the common ground. So I'm running as someone who is dedicated to working with all of you, to representing all of Arizona, to finding our common ground. That's the approach I've taken throughout my career. I'm not running to impose my will. I'm not running to impose my views. I'm running to do the best I can to make sure we find the common ground where we all come together and we invest in our future, because that's what we have to do if we want our state to succeed. So that's a bit about a difference between my background as well as the approach I will bring to the office. I have not been funded by any dark money, any outside funds. I'm running entirely on the clean elections funds that all four candidates had, and I will be beholden to no one. I'm running to represent you. I'm running to take back the commission from the corporations and make sure it's representing the people of Arizona. One of my first acts as a commissioner will be to make sure that we have reporting on political expenditures by utilities. If in fact, Arizona Public Service has invested $3 million in trying to buy this election, the ratepayers of Arizona Public Service deserve to know that. The voters deserve to know that. And I believe our commission has shown a lack of integrity and political will by refusing to order that reporting. I will order that. I will make sure you know it. As a commissioner, I don't believe I will have the ability to stop the funding, but I will have the ability to make sure it's transparent and we're all aware of it and where it's coming from. I think that's an important part of our political process. So I appreciate those questions.
James was asking on Facebook. Yes.
Okay, so we have a question from James on Facebook. Asked, how will you maintain your independence from APS influence? I'm not sure if there's a whole lot to add to what I just said there, but I think the key is I will stand up and I will say this needs to be reported. Second, really they don't have any leverage over me. I'm not looking to launch a new political career. I'm running to represent you in this office. If my independence means that someone spends millions of dollars to keep me out from running a second term, I'll be happy that I was able to be there for 4 years serving you. I am hopeful that after 4 years, everyone will be pleased with how I have served and you will be happy to reelect me. But I'm not going to worry about how much money a utility may spend to try to defeat me. I'm not looking to leave this office and run for something else. I'm not looking to get funding for one of my family members to run for office, as some have been accused of. I'm just looking to represent you, and my guarantee to you is that I will do that. Let's look a bit at some of the questions we've got that start to get us into some of the issues. So we had two questions that came into Facebook earlier today that my staff had submitted up here, and we can probably put these together. One was from Margot asking about leaf solar panels, and then we had a related comment from Alice saying that it's her concern that the utilities are trying to stop solar, particularly rooftop solar, and she was pointing to the fact that in some states we actually have situations where the utilities own the panels and perhaps lease the roof, but the utilities own the panel, not the homeowners. Let me actually step back a little bit. Let me give a little general introduction to the solar issues, and then we'll come around to these specific questions, and perhaps by then we'll have some other questions as well. So the big debate that went on about a year ago before the commission, and if you live in the Phoenix metro area, you could not have missed the advertisements paid for both by APS and the solar industry, as they basically went to war on this issue and tried to influence the commissioners. So if you install rooftop solar on your house, then at night, like now, you're not producing power. In the middle of the summer, your air conditioners are using more power probably than your solar produces. So you're continuing to take power in from the utility, in from the grid, just like everybody else. And your meter is going to spin, just like everybody else's with those charges. Well, then in the middle of an afternoon like today, at 2 in the afternoon, chances are you're producing far more power than you're using. You're sending that power back out and it's going to your neighbors. So it's a benefit to the rest of the grid and your neighbors. And your meter, for all intents and purposes, spins backwards. Hence the term net metering. At the end of the month, how much power did you produce? How much did you take? For most of us, that difference is going to be you still took power from utility, but less than you would have, so you pay a reduced bill based on how much you actually use. That's the net metering. So what happened was Arizona Public Service came in and they said, we believe solar customers with net metering are being subsidized $50 to $100 per customer because they're benefiting from this larger grid and they're not paying for it. The utility industry came in, sorry, not utility, the solar industry came in, and the solar industry said, you know, Arizona Public Service, you have this all wrong. In fact, we believe you should be paying solar homeowners more. Instead of you, APS, having to build a new power plant, if we have growth in power, these individuals spent $10, $20, $30, $40,000 putting solar panels on their roof. And second, instead of power having to be brought down from distant regions and lose 5, 10, 15% along the way, you're simply taking our solar power and sending it to our neighbors and eliminating those line losses. And in fact, you should pay us more. The point I would make about this is philosophically, both APS and the solar industry are making valid points. I recently installed solar on my roof. I live within solar projects territory. There is no question that I benefit from the larger grid. There's also no question that I made a significant investment and I'm benefiting my neighbors when they can use that power. What we failed to do is no one did the economic analysis in an unbiased, comprehensive way to really put numbers behind this. In the end, the commission made a decision, a political decision without data, and what they said was, we believe there is a cost shift, and we believe that it is on, well, what they did is they assessed the fee that works out to be $4 or $5 per month per solar customer. So much less than the 50 asked for, but still a fee. So that was put in place. It has not changed the economics. The savings of solar customers is sufficient, but that $5 fee doesn't change it. So the next thing that has occurred here, and this is where the least question has come up, is a bill was passed in Arizona a number of years ago, and it said that if you install solar, you will not have to pay property tax on that solar. And that could be seen as an incentive, it is, but I might point out if I made a similar investment in a new, more efficient air conditioner, if I insulated my attic, if I put in better windows, I wouldn't pay an increased property tax because of that. Be that as it may, this was put in place. And then what happened 6, 7 months ago now is the State Department of Revenue came in and said, you know, if you own your system, if you're a homeowner, you own it, this is the law. You will not pay a property tax on it. But if you leased it, we don't think this law applies to you. We think it was interpreted wrong, and we are going to send a tax bill to the owners of leased systems. They have started to do that. Well, the reality is 60 to 70% of Arizonans have leased their systems. So the majority of solar homeowners in Arizona have leased systems. The owner of those leases, that may be Solar City, it may be a financial institution, it may be a local firm, it may be a local solar company, have received those tax bills. Now, in most cases, the leases were written so that that cost will get passed back. So as a homeowner, if you have a lease with, for example, Solar City, chances are your lease says that fee can be passed back to you. I have a couple concerns with this. One is we are trying to encourage solar. This becomes a disincentive. So I think it's just a bad policy. Second, it's not fair. You know, I managed to buy my system, and I'm not going to be taxed. But my neighbors who perhaps weren't able to buy one, either they didn't want to or they maybe financially couldn't afford to, so they leased one. More often, folks that are probably a bit more moderate income who lease the system, they're going to have to pay the tax. And this tax could be up to 100, 150 or more a year. It does begin to change the economics. So I would agree with Margot's question and her point, or actually, sorry, it was Alice's, that it does look, and I do believe that in many cases our utilities are trying to slow down the adoption of rooftop solar. The other point, though, that I would make is, you know, I think, Alice, you made this comment that in some other states, utilities actually own the solar and they, from the lease the roof. Well, we now have a proposal from Arizona Public Service to do exactly that, and we have a similar proposal from Tucson Electric Power. In the case of Arizona Public Service, they have made a proposal of, instead of building a new large centralized solar field, let's put solar on 3,000 homes. APS is proposing that they would pay the residents $30 a month to lease the roof, and APS would own the solar. Tucson Electric Power has a proposal that would be similar, maybe about half as many installations. And in the case of Tucson Electric Power, what they are proposing is they will lock in your utility rate. Some figures like $99 a month have been talked about. But they would lock it in for the length of time that you have the solar. So as energy prices went up, you'd be locked in at that current rate, but the utility would own the solar. So we are beginning to see those kind of proposals in Arizona as well. So let me see what else we have in terms of questions. So we have a question from Ken, who asks, what's the most promising 724 renewable out there. And then Maddie put a question up on Facebook that asked about what my views are on what the views are on smart meters. So first, in terms of the question of, this question about 24/7, right? So obviously, when the sun's not shining, solar's not producing. When the wind's not blowing, windmills are not producing. This creates a significant issue that the utilities have to deal with. It is a significant technical challenge. It is one that I believe creates an incredible opportunity for Arizona. Just as with solar, where I said Arizona can be the world leader on solar, we also can be the world leader on the technology of how we integrate solar, how we achieve greater efficiency and conservation both in energy and water. As we become stronger leaders on these, this becomes an economic opportunity to transfer this technology to the rest of the world, to be at the forefront of research. So coming back to the specific question, how do we deal with the fact that many of our renewable resources are intermittent? Now, the question of, well, what would be perfect in terms of a 24/7? Geothermal resources tend to be this. Arizona has very limited geothermal resources. We have not tapped them for power. In California, there are a number of areas that do run geothermal, and so that's a source that's there anytime you can tap it. Another classic 24/7 one is one of our oldest sources of renewable power, hydropower. Arizona probably gets about 5% of its power from hydropower, so basically Lake Mead is the majority. We do produce power from some of the Salt River Project dams and elsewhere. Lake, largest source for us at Hoover Dam. Like I said, that's about 5% of our power. We get about 2% of our power from solar, and we'll talk a bit more in a minute maybe about the other sources that are providing 90% plus of our power that will continue to be, the traditional source of power will continue to be our predominant power sources for many years to come. But so hydropower and geothermal both have that 24/7 capacity. The challenge for us is energy storage. That's one of the new frontiers, another place where I believe Arizona should be working to be in a leadership role with our universities. If we can develop economical and affordable storage, then that's going to give us the ability to take an intermittent source and extend it. Now, one area where we have done this is we've done this with the Solano plant. If you drive from Phoenix, head towards Yuma, as you go through past Gila Bend, you'll see these 3 square miles of mirrors. And that is the hydro, sorry, that's the mirrors are basically heating a fluid, and the heat is being stored in molten salt. So you have some direct production of power, but that molten salt stores enough power to continue to produce energy 6 hours after the sun goes down. So we'll see this, we'll see more techniques. Someday we may be storing renewable energy in our electric cars that will be parked under solar cells at work, and we'll come home and maybe run our houses off the extra power of the batteries. There are all sorts of options that we need to be exploring and looking at. So then the next question that was asked here was what my view is of smart meters. If you go to my website, you'll see this is one of the questions that we are getting quite a bit of. So just real briefly for those who aren't familiar with it, the old style meter, you look outside, you may still have these, and it was just a spinning disc. It was recording your use. It was what was called an analog meter. All you really knew was the total use between the last time it was read and this time it was read. What we're beginning to see is a movement towards what's called a smart meter. And the idea is with this meter is how much energy is being used at any particular time of day. Potentially, these meters also could be used in the future so that appliances in your home could be remotely controlled. Say if we suddenly had too much demand and maybe our solar power was down because of clouds or storms coming over, perhaps you would cycle through cutting power back in appliances or air conditioning for very brief periods that could have no impact on homeowners' comfort, but could help reduce the peak. So there's a number of ways we could use these. There's multiple concerns that have been raised. Number one that I hear about is it's the concern about privacy of information. Will my neighbors and others be able to see the signal and know what my use is? Perhaps related to that, will government and utility, sort of a big brother type concern, know more than they should be knowing about my use of energy. A second concern is public health concerns, that there's a wireless signal coming out from these smart meters. Some would say it's less exposure than you're going to get from your cell phone. Others would say it's much more. That's an area of active debate. But many people are quite concerned about this. Another issue is, are there safety issues? There have been some areas where folks have wondered if the wiring of these meters has led to fire hazards. These are very rare, but potentially they have occurred. So these are some of, and the last issue is, if you don't want a smart meter, many utilities will allow you to keep your old meter, but there's a fee to do that. So my position on this has been multifold. One is, if there are public health, well, to the degree there are public health issues, we need to solve them. We need to understand what kind of metering we can do that will minimize these impacts. If there are, and there clearly are public privacy concerns, we need to figure out how to solve those as well. And we should be able to solve those. What I would point out, though, is I believe we are going to move to a situation where we are going to much more actively have to manage our energy supply and our demand. I believe this is how we're going to keep our costs affordable. I believe this is how we are going to make our renewable resources integrated into our grid better. So I believe we have to move to what some might call a smarter grid. That doesn't necessarily mean we have to have a smart meter with a wireless signal, but I do believe we will need some technology to do that. My commitment is I take these concerns seriously. I will make sure that on the commission I'm asking the right questions about them, but I do believe that we need to find ways to have more interactive management of our supply and demand. That is going to be critical for our future, and the challenge is going to be how do we sort that out and figure it out.
Frank just called in with a question, and he wants to know what your take on EPCO water is and how we're supposed to pay this much for basic water use.
Okay, so Jamie's pointed out we got a call over the phone from Frank, and he's asking about EPCOR. So the number, if somebody wants to call, and we don't have too much time left, but if you want to call any question, 602-253-4729. Actually, why don't you let me hold that up in front of the screen for a second. So this is the number you can call in if you would like to call in your question. So again, Jamie's timing again. Frank's question was about EPCOR and
he said, how are we supposed to pay this much for basic water use? What his concern is.
So here, let me pass this back to Jamie in terms of the phone number, and like I say, we can take calls for a few more minutes. So EPCOR is a water and wastewater utility that is serving customers throughout Arizona. They are expanding. They have, over the last several years, bought up several other previous existing private water companies. A question last night we focused on water. One of the questions we had that related to EPCOR and others is EPCOR is a Canadian-held corporation. Actually, EPCOR is owned by the city of Edmonton, Canada. It's a very unusual structure. But there are some concerns about out-of-state, out-of-country ownership of our utilities, and we are increasingly seeing that. If you want to hear more about that discussion, I encourage you to go to YouTube and you can listen to last night's conversation. So specifically, I know a bit about the EPCOR issues on the water rates and also on the wastewater. So we've got several concerns going on. I think Frank's might be on the water side, but let me briefly mention the wastewater one. So primarily in the West Valley of Phoenix, so Sun City West, Agua Fria Division, which is areas outside Sun City West and Verado, the community of Anthem, and then a system in Mojave. They each have a separate wastewater system. Their rates are very different. Sun City being the lowest. They've been there for years. Their infrastructure is all paid off. They may need to start replacing it soon, and that will be a cost. Compared to, say, Verado, one of the newer communities with much higher cost. And the EPCOR has been asked by the Utilities Commission, the Corporation Commission, to look at what would be the impacts of further separating some of these systems. What would be the impacts of putting them together? So clearly, those who live in the communities with the highest rates and the newest infrastructure would gain the most by consolidation. Those like Sun City residents, at least in the short term, would clearly be paying the cost of a consolidation. And so my view of this is, my first effort on this one would be, I really would like to see these 5 communities come together with commission staff to help them, with the Residential Utility Consumers Office and with the utility, and look if, are there better solutions? At the moment, we're looking at these win-lose. Someone wins, someone loses. But to what degree do we have the ability to phase in any consolidations we make over time? And to what degree do we have the ability to recognize the costs that communities like Sun City may have to bear in the future? And can we do a consolidation where their costs won't be any more than they were going to be as they had to invest in their infrastructure? This is a complicated issue. I just put that out as some things that I think could be looked at. I think we can be more creative and find others. The commitment I make is I recognize the seriousness of this issue. I recognize the fairness and equity issues, and I am very interested in working with all of you on that. We've also had some issues on the water side. I actually was just meeting with some individuals in Fountain Hills earlier today. So in Fountain Hills, EPCOR came in looking for a rate increase. And periodically utilities look for rate increases. That's the job of the commission, to have a rate hearing, look at all their costs, and determine whether this makes sense. In the case of Fountain Hills, the Corporation Commission and staff came in and said, based on our analysis, we believe an approximately 11% rate increase could be appropriate. Now, there are clearly some residents who think that's too much. The town itself was comfortable with that. But when it came to the commission actually did two things. Instead of an 11% rate increase, they actually allowed a 20% rate increase. And then in addition to that, they allowed something called system improvement benefits. This is the ability for the utility to make improvements in its infrastructure, fixing leaks, replacing meters, fixing mains, and charge those incrementally as they did them without waiting for a rate case. So we've had a couple cases like this recently where the commission has wound up giving benefits, whether it's the system improvement benefit, whether it's a higher rate increase, whether in fact it's putting both of those together when staff recommended one or the other. The commission has also recently allowed some of the smaller water companies to pass through their income taxes where they had not been previously allowed to. So I think this raises a serious question of whether the commission is being overly generous to our utilities. Let me be clear. The job of a commissioner is to represent the ratepayer and citizen of Arizona. Part of that is keeping your rates low, but another part is also making sure you will continue to have reliable service well into the future. That's a balancing act. To me, it's important that all of our utilities succeed and do well. That requires that they have a sufficient return that investors want to invest in building the infrastructure we need in our state. So the job of the commissioner is to make sure they get that level of return, but no more than that. And that's the balancing act that we have to do. And my commitment to you is that I will very seriously listen to your concerns. I will take them seriously. I will make sure the staff takes them seriously. And we have to find that right balance. That's a challenge. And there are some more complicated issues here that we could talk about further. And happy to have a continued dialogue on my Facebook page on some of these issues. Another key one with water companies is we have a number of areas of the state, more likely the more rural areas, some of the smaller towns, where they are served by very small water companies that in fact may not be viable. They really not have the capacity to do their job. How do we deal with that? Or perhaps they have not invested in their infrastructure, including even some of our larger ones, particularly developer-owned utilities that may later be bought privately. They were trying to keep their costs down while the communities were developing, and now they have deferred infrastructure costs that needs to be paid by someone. How do we make sure that's fairly allocated? Those are some of the challenges that a commissioner faces. We may need to wrap it up 2 minutes, Jay. Do any other questions come in? Or okay, so look at a few more we've got here. So Sarah from Twitter asked, what steps does Arizona need to take to become the leader in solar? So let me deal with that, and then we've got a question from Karen Christian who's logged on here. It says, will you rescind the tax policy statement that allows utilities to charge us higher rates to pay for the profits of their shareholders? Let me deal first with the one about what can Arizona be a solar leader, and then we'll talk a bit about Karen's question, which I think is a bit related to what I've just been talking about, that there may be some more ramifications we can get into. So yeah, one of my main statements to this campaign is Arizona should be a leader in solar. Let's make Arizona a leader in solar. And when I say that, I'm not talking just about putting solar on our rooftop or solar in our large utility scale, though we need to do that. We can produce energy from solar. Today, I think I mentioned we get about 2% of our energy from solar, and about 1% of our households have rooftop solar. We can expand both of those enormously. But when I say Arizona should be a leader, I'm also looking at what do we do to become at the forefront of research on solar energy. So that if you're thinking of a company wanting to develop new technology, you're thinking, look, let's come and partner with the University of Arizona or Arizona State University or Northern Arizona University, as well as companies already here like First Solar and our utilities that are at the forefront in many cases of solar. One of my most enjoyable days of the campaign was taking a tour with Tucson Electric Power of their U of A Tech Park, where they have a collaborative research relationship with the University of Arizona. They have 7 large-scale solar technologies being tested. If you go to my website, if you look at the handout cards we've got, you'll see a picture of me standing in front of a very large solar array, and this is one of the ones that's at the University of Arizona Tech Park. So this is the kind of work we need to advance. And it will bring jobs to Arizona. It will bring high-tech, good jobs to Arizona. I am confident that solar will be a rapidly increasing way that we power not just Arizona, but the way we power the world. If we can be at the forefront of that, not just the development of it, but make it more efficient and learning. How do we integrate it into a grid? How do we combine solar with our traditional coal and nuclear and natural gas facilities? There's enormous potential there. And Arizona was in many ways in the forefront, but we've been slipping. So if you look back a year ago, Arizona was #1 per capita in new solar installations. And then the first quarter of this year, we slipped to, I think, 3rd. In the last quarter that's been measured, we slipped to 7th, and we're continuing to slip. And one of the main reasons we're slipping is the Corporation Commission that's in place now is making a less hospitable climate for solar. They're beginning to support the utilities and trying to slow solar down, or at least distributed solar. And we've got the tax that's increased on lease. The more we do things like this, the more the solar industry moves to other places. That has already started to happen. I want to be on the commission. I want to reverse this. And I want to look at how we make this the economic potential it is for the state of Arizona. While we're on this issue, I think let me just real briefly make clear, I spend a lot of time talking about solar, and I am a pro-solar candidate. I'm not anti-anything. I believe we need and will continue to need our other sources of power. We get about 35% of our power from coal. We get almost 30% of our power from nuclear. The Palo Verde facility outside Buckeye is the largest nuclear power facility in the country. And we're getting about 25% of our power from natural gas, and that's the part that's most rapidly increasing because natural gas at the moment is cheap, and also environmental regulations are making coal more expensive, and we have been reducing some of our coal production. This is going to continue to evolve, but we are going to continue to rely on these 3 traditional sources of power well into our future while we advance solar, we advance wind, and we advance other renewable technologies to contribute the share they can and help us have certainly cleaner power and surely cheaper power. Most of the experts I talk to say that at utility scale, solar will be cost competitive with other sources of power that we use within a few years. The panels I put on my house, they cost less than half what they would have cost if I put them on 2 or 3 years before. So the incentives being in place are working. We're making an investment in our future. We're making an investment in building the economy, and that will continue to work. So let me leave the energy issues aside, and maybe we should close with the water issues and a few closing comments here. So again, just reminding myself, looking again at Karen's question. So it's again, would I rescind the tax policy statement that allows utilities to charge us higher rates to pay for the profits of their shareholders? And Karen, I'm going to make maybe an assumption of what you're talking about because I may be missing some of the finer points, but I think what's probably being referred to here, at least in part, is the issue I brought up of a change was made recently for some of the smaller utilities that are Chapter S corporations. So Chapter C corporations already are able, these are the larger typical utilities, they're able to put their taxes as part of their costs, but Chapter S were not. So it was raised by the utilities that, look, this really isn't fair, right? Chapter C corporations get to pass this through, we don't. I will have to look more into this, but one of the things I understand is there are other tax benefits and reasons why you would be a Chapter S. So it's not really appropriate for them just to come to the Utility Commission and say we're not being treated fairly. It is a more complicated question that I need to understand it more thoroughly. The other point I will make about this that I typically talk about is I will get asked lots of questions about, well, what about system improvement benefits? What about this pass-through, that pass-through, this special adjustment? All these different ways we've created to go around rate cases and increase the revenue to the utilities. I think we need to step back from that. To me, the question is, how much revenue is needed for the utility to succeed and reliably deliver the service to you? I don't want them to get any more than that, but I do want them to get that. Well, if we agree on what that number is, then the question is, what's the most efficient and cost-effective way to make sure the utility gets that return and the customers are treated fairly and justly? Is that to hold everything up with no other adjustments and every several years they come in for a very expensive rate case? Or does it make sense to have some adjustments that reduces the need for expensive rate cases, reduces the interest and holding costs that companies have? There may be. So that's the question we need to ask. But in my mind, this isn't how do we create a number of incentives and loopholes so the customer pays more and the company earns more. That isn't how this should be treated, and I am worried that is how our current commission, in some cases, is treating this. I'll need to learn more about that. But what I commit to you is my eye is going to be on that bottom line and how do we get you the most efficient service while keeping the companies viable. That's the challenge. And I believe if we keep adding additional fees, if nothing else, it makes it more complicated. But in some ways, it could be reduced in cost. So Karen, I may have not hit exactly what you're looking for, so I know we've been interacting on Facebook, so I look forward to follow up on that. Well, let me go ahead and wrap things up. We've gone a little longer than we intended to here, but there have been some good questions, and I always enjoy handling the questions. That's why we're doing this. So I want to make a few points. One, join us tomorrow. We're going to start at 10 o'clock, and we'll go for 10 minutes, and we will do that throughout the day at the top of every hour. We're going to have some special guests. Some of them will still be coming in, but a few I do know now. I'll be sitting down at noon with Terry Goddard, and we are going to talk briefly about the dark money issue. We will talk about his legislative proposal to deal with it, and I will talk about its impact on the commission and what I, as a commissioner, would do to deal with it. At 1 o'clock, David Garcia, who's a candidate for superintendent of public instruction, is going to come in. And you may ask, well, what's the connection between the commission and public instruction in Arizona? We're going to talk about two issues, and more may come up. But one of them is the whole question of innovation. Just as I'm concerned about Arizona being a leader in innovation for technology, David's concerned about being a leader in innovation for education. And the second issue that we're going to talk about briefly is what's a big concern of mine is, as I've said, I'm doing this because we need to reach out to the voters. Elections should be about interaction with the voters and residents. Elections should be about issues. Campaigns should be about issues. That's not what we're seeing. So I think our schools have a key role here. And how do we educate our youth to be engaged in our civic processes? I believe we're in serious trouble if we don't get a larger scale of engagement and an electorate and a citizenry that wants to pay more attention to these issues and demands of their elected officials what they need in terms of service. And I believe the education system can help us. So I look forward to that conversation. We'll have a legislator or two come in, but join us tomorrow. Join us for those 10 minutes. And also, the ways you can submit questions. Submit them on my Facebook site. You can tweet them to us. You can call the number we put up. And you want to give me that number, Jamie, as we're wrapping up, I'll put the number back up again. And so this is a number you can call with your questions in tomorrow, and we will feed them into the conversation. So then the last thing let me conclude with is obviously I'm doing this because I'm running for election. I'm looking for support. I'm looking for votes. I would appreciate any support you can provide. Our campaign is running largely through social media and trying to have a conversation and get the message out. Anything you can do to let your friends and associates know to support pay attention to the Corporation Commission race and vote. I'm confident if they do research, they'll decide on the candidate they want to see. And you can help me by spreading that message through email, through social media. Go to our Facebook page, find what we've got, like it. Liking doesn't get us very far. Share it. Share it so it goes to others, and try to get your friends to share it with their friends, because then we start talking about real numbers. So again, thank you very much. Jim Holway, I appreciate your listening, and if you can join us again tomorrow, great. I look forward to seeing you as we continue to travel the state and talk about the issues. Have a great evening. Thank you very much.